Weeks since returning to Washington, Congressman Jim Costa has been advocating for several key issues here in the Valley: water, farmers, and protecting federal programs and initiatives that benefit people here in California and around the nation. So joining me now to discuss his work in Washington is Congressman Jim Costa. So thank you so much for joining me on Sunday Morning Matters.
Well, thank you, because Sunday morning always matters, and it's great to be on the show.
They do. It's like setting the tone for the rest of the week.
Absolutely.
Kind of like making your bed in the morning. Okay, so I want to start with asking you about your work on the House Ag Committee and making sure that our Valley interests are represented and we're getting what we're asking for. How do you do that on the committees that you serve on in Congress?
Well, as one of the highest-ranking members on the House Ag Committee, I think that the agricultural productivity of this valley is among the highest in the entire country. 300 commodities. Agriculture is we're the #1 ag state in the nation. So as a representative on the committee, my job is to advocate on behalf of California agriculture. And we do that in a number of different ways, focusing on reauthorization of the Farm Bill, which unfortunately we're a year behind. Hopefully we'll get it done this year. Important commodities that depend upon market access to promote our agriculture sales. 44% of California's agriculture is exported. Focusing on efforts to deal with quality control. We've had a real serious problem here in the last year with the high-path avian flu that started with poultry and now has spread to the dairy industry. California's dairy industry, we produce 20% of all the milk products in America. But the list goes on, and so there's a lot of legislation that we deal with, and we hope that we'll get a farm bill this year.
What do people in D.C., people that you work with, your colleagues, what do they think about California agriculture? Because we grow stuff all around the country, and people consider themselves farmers or from farming states or from farming regions. But the Central Valley is sometimes overlooked as a part of that community. What do they think about California ag?
Well, many of them are surprised. I mean, they know that California is big in aerospace and high tech with Silicon Valley, and of course tourism industry, but many realize that we're the #1 agricultural state in the nation, and we have been for decades.
Right.
And it's not even close. Last year, $59.5 billion at the farm gate. I think Texas is #2 at some $30 billion plus. And we continue to just be at the cutting edge of technologies and research and value added. 75–80% of the world's almonds and pistachios come from California. My congressional district is the largest citrus producing congressional district in the nation. 80% of the citrus production is here in California. 90% of the canned tomatoes comes from California. So the diversity of over 300 commodities, we have to continue to let people know in Washington and other parts of the country that we are the #1 agricultural state in the nation, putting food on America's dinner table every night. And I say on the committee, food is a national security issue. We don't look at it that way often, the majority of Americans, because you go to a grocery store, you go to your favorite restaurant, and there seems to not be shortages, although right now with eggs, there's a problem because of the high-path avian flu. But notwithstanding, people take their food for granted. And I suspect with climate change and other factors, we're going to find that in the middle of this 21st century, whether or not nation states can live together amicably will in large part due to food production and water availability, because where water flows, food grows. That's one of the other things I spend a whole lot of time on is water, because 99% of our valley's agriculture is dependent upon irrigation, whether it's surface water or groundwater. And that's one of the reasons that we're so productive with good soils and good climate. So
that leads me right into my next question. You also mentioned, we think of California, we think of Silicon Valley, we think of some of the coolest and most innovative technology. But if you come to the Central Valley and you see how they pick those tomatoes that they're going to can without crushing them, without damaging them, it is innovative. And our farmers have to do more with less resources every single year. So when we talk about water, because we can't farm without it, what specifically does the committee look at? What legislatures or laws or bills are you guys writing to address that? And then specifically addressing our groundwater recharge, because that's really important when it doesn't rain.
Correct. Farmers in the Valley care about a lot of things, and it's a very highly regulated industry, but number one is a reliable water supply. Number two is a reliable workforce, and number three is a fair level playing field for trades, which is why the tariffs right now are of great concern. But the water reliability, where we're focusing on, is to get in balance with climate change factors, our surface supply of water behind our dams, and to get our groundwater in a place where it can be recharged effectively, because the majority of farmers here have water from two sources. They have their surface water from the water district that they farm in, although some farmers don't have a water district that they farm in, and that's more difficult for them. And then groundwater, the wells, are as the second source of water in which we rely on. And what we're trying to do, and we've provided literally over $1 billion for groundwater recharge. And all our water districts now are actively engaged in recharging their underground supply. Individual farmers are doing the same. And so 2 years ago, when we had that deluge of those atmospheric rivers, we were able to use that water. And we think that we've recharged over 1.6 million acre-feet of water in the last 18 months. That's raising the water level from our underground supply, which is critical. You know, I joke that when I was at Fresno State a few years ago, I got my first checking account, and my dad said, "Kid, you can only write those checks as long as you're making deposits, right?" Well, that's our groundwater.
Right.
If we're not having our groundwater in balance, we can't continue to withdraw from that underground supply and expect that to be a long-term supply of water. So we've got a very active program with our water districts now. We've got a water blueprint. We're working with our state and federal contractors, east side and west side. I've got legislation that provides additional financial support to do both. We're going to enlarge San Luis Reservoir by raising it 10 feet. We're looking at Pine Flat Dam as another alternative to provide additional supply. Sites Reservoir up there by Shasta is another reservoir that we're going to build a new reservoir, 1 million acre-feet, maybe 1.5 million acre-feet. We're rehabilitating the Friant-Kern Canal to its original capacity. So we've actually put literally billions of dollars as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure package, monies that are being spent right now on much needed infrastructure on water as well as transportation. That's why the president's freeze on federal spending is very concerning, because we don't want those monies that have been committed and promised to our water infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure, to be taken away.
Yes. Okay. So I'm glad that you mentioned infrastructure, because we look at countries in the Middle East who are their deserts. There is no water around them, and yet they seem to have really a plethora of water. I mean, in Israel they have that, and so I think Californians, we hear a lot about water allocation, how water districts are giving water, but not necessarily about, okay, well, how are we building, what is our innovation to get more water here? So I'm glad you mentioned that, but you also mentioned Trump's freeze on federal money to some federal programs.
Right.
What's your understanding of that? So right now they've unfrozen that. But what's your understanding of how that money freeze would affect federal programs?
Well, it could have a disastrous effect, because the Congress, under our system, has the power of the purse strings, not the president. We have delineation of responsibilities. The president, whoever that might be, has executive authority to do executive orders. But in many cases, some of these executive orders are not only misguided, I would say, but he has no authority to make those changes, because the Congress, when they appropriated the money, determined for what purposes those monies would be spent. And no president of the United States has the ability to say, well, gee, I don't want to spend money there, I don't want to spend money here, I want to move it over there. It's the Congress's responsibility that has the power of the purse strings for almost 250 years to determine where, once we pass a budget, and we obviously have a lot of debate over those budgets, and we're right in the middle of it now, and also focusing on our deficit. And then the president has input, of course, But at the end of the day, he signs the budget, and then it's required to go for those purposes. So I sent a letter to the president saying, whoa, whoa, and I wasn't the only one. Our infrastructure is so important, and we have been living off the investments our parents and grandparents made a generation or two ago. The investments that we've made in the last 4 years, frankly, we've not seen the likes of since the 1960s, long overdue, for water, for transportation, for broadband, a whole host of efforts, not only in California, but around the country.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what would you say about, isn't there an argument to be made for evaluating how we spend money, and what is the president's sort of reach when it comes to that? Because what I think people voted for was a shift from what we had seen for 4 years to evaluate what exactly are we spending money on, and should we keep doing it that way?
But that's what Congress does when we appropriate the money. We have committees in the House, we have committees in the Senate. There are policy committees that spend a lot of time, like the Agriculture Committee, determining what our priorities should be. And then we have a budget committee that determines how much, and those are always negotiations between both political parties as to what our ultimate budget's going to be that we're going to vote on in the House. So that vetting, that deliberation is totally appropriate, and it's the responsibility of the Congress to make those determinations. And the president, by the way, has an ability to weigh in as those committee hearings are taking place. Oftentimes, the administration will be supportive of this spending or opposed to that spending. Say, if the package looks like this, I may not sign the bill. So, I mean, there's certainly the president, any president, has the opportunity to weigh in, but a president does not have the ability, whether they like it or not, to take actions that were of a previous administration, of a previous Congress, and say, I'm going to ignore all of that. Because, that's not allowed under the Constitution. We've seen some court cases now here in the last week or two that have rescinded those executive orders for that very reason.
Right. So there are a lot of people, we have an appropriations process so that we can decide where money goes. What are improvements that can be made to that process? Because we see a lot of times we get past that process and then bills get sent in with lots of different things in them that sort of should be done during the appropriations process, right?
Well, I think you can make an argument, and I have, that we need to fix our budget process. In the last 20, 30 years, I don't think it's working the way it should, but I think there's a bipartisan view that folks feel that we really need to do a better job of passing the 12 appropriation bills that we're supposed to pass every fiscal year by October 1 and get to the president's desk, pass both houses to be signed. What too often happens is one house or the other house passes a half or a third of the bills, and then we meet our deadlines, and then it rolls into an omnibus package, as you described it, and a lot of stuff gets put in there, and it makes it difficult for members because you either have to go up or down. And I've never voted to shut down government. I think it's irresponsible. But some members have voted opposed because they, don't like this spending or that spending. But the fact of the matter is that we could do a lot better, clearly, in fixing our budget process, because we have not, well, I don't care if it's Republicans or Democrats that have been in charge in the majority, it hasn't worked the way it should.
Because wouldn't it help us sort of focus our conversations and improve the debates about how we should appropriate money if we're being really specific and we're looking at these 12 different committees? Wouldn't that help the conversation around debating how we spend money?
No, I think so, and that's what's broken in the process at this time, because the committees are not able to get consensus to pass their bills out, and with the narrow margins, having the votes to pass a bill off the House floor becomes then more difficult. And so and then we have our deficit that we must be focused on, and it's You know, I mean, you can look at the increase of that deficit over the last 20, 30 years, and we need to be able to control statutory spending, non-discretionary spending, and we have to realize that it takes a certain amount of revenues to keep our budget balanced.
Right.
And that's what gets lost, and so we end up putting it on Uncle Sam's credit card. And when we put it on Uncle Sam's credit card, that increases the deficit, and therein lies the problem.
Right. So, okay, so you mentioned Trump there making executive orders about money, but he also he got rid of several inspectors generals without giving Congress any notice. You know, and they're there to as a neutral party to evaluate what the government does and make sure that everything is on the up and up. So how do we hold the president accountable for doing something that Congress deems he's not allowed to do?
Well, and that's where the courts come in. Clearly, the 17 auditor generals, I mean, you talk about checks and balances, these are not partisan people. They are placed in these different departments and agencies to make sure that the money is being spent for what purpose it was intended to. To dismiss these 17 auditor generals, and by law requires a 30-day notice with the Congress. A person like Senator Mitch McConnell feels very strongly about this. And so I think, you know, we see the pushback taking place, and I see court action that clearly is going to contest the president's ability to remove these individuals who are supposed to be watchdogs on federal tax, on U.S. taxpayer dollars, to make sure that they're being spent properly. Is
there an argument to be made that he may have the authority to do this if he feels like there are political adversaries in those positions?
Well, he, by law, is required to notify the Congress that he wants to dismiss these individuals and what the stated purpose and reason are.
Right.
And historically, these individuals have not been partisan, and they're put there for the primary purpose that they are not partisan individuals. They're calling balls and strikes like an umpire.
So that's being litigated right now. People are debating it. So we will see. But I want to go back to the top of the conversation and talk about immigrants and migrants. So that was a huge reason why experts think that we saw a big swing in voters, why people voted for Trump. So what are you seeing play out here in the Central Valley when we are talking about these big immigration raids that are happening all across the country?
Well, I think the law of unintended consequences is what's going to end up happening if they attempt to deport 20 million undocumented people. I'll give you the numbers. Under the 8 years of Obama, they deported 3 million people who were not here legally. Under the first term of President Trump, there was a deportation of 1.8 million. It was 4 years, not 8 years. Under Biden's term, even though he got criticized a great deal, and I think he should have done a better job on border security. Border security, by the way, is tied in with all of this. Still deported 4 million people. So Obama, 3 million in 8 years, Trump, 1.8 million in 4 years, and Biden, 4 million in 4 years. We have a border that needs to have the kind of restrictions to protect against illegal crossings. There was such a bill that passed, almost passed the Senate a year ago. Lindsey Graham, who's a supporter of the president, called it the most comprehensive border security bill that had been before the Congress in 25 years. Lindsey Graham, the most comprehensive border security bill. And President Trump said, no, don't pass it because I want to make this an issue. And so the bipartisan support for that much needed border security bill ended up not passing the Senate. We need to go back to that and use it as a template to improve not only in terms of border control officers, but high-tech security to deal with drug trafficking, human trafficking, the cartels, all of this that end up, as President Trump has said, engaged in crimes that Americans want to be protected from. We all want to protect Americans. Nobody wants to have these cartels and these illegal trafficking of drugs, fentanyl, and human trafficking that's become as profitable as drug trafficking, sad to say. And so we need to have that kind of a border security bill to really stop this. We need, and President Trump is engaged in this, I'll give him credit, with the countries of Mexico and others to do their part.
Right.
Because that's a key part of this effort as well, to protect our border from people coming here who have ill intent.
Right.
But then also we need comprehensive immigration reform.
Yeah.
We're a nation of immigrants, past and present, and I think that's part of America's secret sauce. Let me say that if they deport 20 million people, a lot of those folks, 3 million of them estimated in California, are engaged in 3 critical industries. What? Agriculture, hospitality industry, and building. And we have a fear factor that's taking place around our valley today in the last month of people not showing up for work. I heard that at the Crosby last weekend, that some restaurants were unable to open because they didn't have sufficient workforce.
Where can people, if they are immigrants or they are migrants, where can they learn? Because you're in the land of the free, you have rights regardless of, you know, what your status is. Where can they go to learn about what the rights are of immigrants or migrants?
Well, there's a host of non-governmental organizations that are attempting to protect those individuals and let them know what their ability is. And the tragedy is, and so much of this is, many of these families are circumstances where 2 or 3 of the members of the family are here legally, they have documentation, and 2 or 3 are not. And so the notion that you'd separate a family, and these are folks, hardworking folks, putting dinner on America's table every evening, working, you know, in the industries and construction, focusing on improving our economy and paying into Social Security, which they'll never collect from.
Right.
And
neither will a lot of us, but
oh, we're gonna. That's another thing we got to fix.
You're gonna figure that one out. Okay, so lots of places where we can go. We can always
and call my office.
We can call your congressman. That's what people always tell you to do. Thank you so much for being here today. I would be remiss if I didn't mention his Valentine's for Vets program. I love this program. It's such a great way. You can visit his website or call him for more information about that. Jim Costa.
We never forget the men and women who served our nation.
Absolutely. That's why I wear red every Friday. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.